Hello and welcome to Nigeria, the Road to 2019, a series of programs where Arise News places the audience and the choice at the heart of our coverage of the upcoming presidential elections. I'm Charles Anyegolo. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, all the news, comment and analysis that provide unrivaled insight into Nigeria 2019, including as the country stumbles towards the 2019 general elections, how much does the mainstream narrative need to change in order to secure the future of the country? We examine the path to Nigeria's salvation through the prism of political and ideological poetry. Now, nearly 6 decades after breaking the chains of colonialism all across Nigeria and beyond, there is concern for the future of the country, especially as it heads towards the 2019 general election. Many Nigerians believe things are worse now than they were at independence. They say there is widespread corruption, insecurity, ethnic divisions, sectarian conflict and poverty. And those in authority seem incapable of shouldering the demands of development. Out of this common river of multiplying problems has emerged a new type of political poetry that springs from the need of the poet to speak for the many voiceless Nigerians, because they say that by not speaking, in some ways, they and the community become diminished and powerless to make a change. So, as Nigeria heads towards 2019, confronted with a socio-economic and political order that falls far short of expectations, one writer and poet has taken the suffering and injustices of ordinary Nigerians and transformed them into a sort of poetry of action, marshalling and performing words that are rousing the conscience and enthusiasm of this country. His pen dipped in the blood of pain and protest and inspiration.
Nnamdi Azikiwe, Obafemi Awolowo, Ahmadu Bello, our founding fathers were really and truly different. In fact, the fact that those three people were able to work together somewhat to bring Nigeria into independence is testament to their belief in the viability of one Nigeria. That belief was virtually the only thing they had in common. They were really and truly different. Ahmadu Bello was born in northern Nigeria, raised in northern Nigeria. Northern Nigeria was his cosmos. Obafemi Awolowo was born in the western Nigeria, raised, lived there all his life. That was what he knew. Of the two, the one that was slightly different was Zeke. He came from the east, but he was born in the north. Did part of his education in the east, completed it in the west, worked in the west, did his politics in the west. He was the most cosmopolitan. So it is very logical that the concept of one Nigeria, of a monolithic Nigeria, of a Nigeria where any Nigerian could represent every Nigerian regardless of tribe or faith, it's logical that it came naturally to him because that was his sociocultural background. Obafemi Awolowo had a slightly different idea. Like Ahmadu Bello, he also didn't see Nigeria as one monolithic entity. He saw Nigeria as different groups, but those groups were not the regions. Obafemi Awolowo saw Nigeria as a federation of ethnic nationalities. And when we became independent, it was the vision of Ahmadu Bello that carried the day because Nigeria became independent as a federation of the existing regions. But over time, we have evolved towards the vision of Obafemi Awolowo because over time, different ethnic groups have begun to agitate for greater recognition at the federal level. And that is what has driven the fragmentation of this country from a federation of 4 regions to a federation of 36 states and 1 federal capital territory. But what baffles me is that individually, we have evolved more towards Zeke. Today, Nigerians are more cosmopolitan than ever. 60 years ago, it may have been odd to find a Nigerian who was born outside his place of origin, lives outside of his place of origin, works there, has maybe even lost ties to his place of origin. But today, if I were to ask, how many of you fit this profile? So many hands will go up. Which begs the question, if we have become more similar over time, why is our politics still as divisive as it was 50 years ago?
Well, that spoken word and pioneering performance poetry artist is, of course, the celebrated Dike Chukwumerije, who, it is fair to say, has made a name for himself in Nigeria with his political rhymes and poetical works. And I'm delighted to say that the fabulous Dike Chukwumerije joins me now in the studio. I saw you frowning there because you thought, oh my God, that's a bit over the top. But seriously, that's how a lot of people feel about you. And so I want to start by talking about how you discovered poetry and politics. What was the turning point when you decided to intersect the two and it all blossomed into this amazing creative energy that you have today?
I discovered poetry early in life. I was born into a family where books and reading and literature were highly cherished. My father was a journalist at the time I was born, published in a magazine called Afriscope in the 70s and the 80s. And so I was just born into this literary environment. My elder brother wrote poems, and the first poems I wrote were literally his poems copied into my exercise book.
I like that.
You know, so poetry has always been a part of my life, and so has politics. I was also born into a political, you can say, family. My father was a politician.
Yes, absolutely, because I was going to say, your father was a spokesperson for the Biafran government during the Civil War. Then he later reincarnated in Nigeria as a politician, then an information minister, and later still as a senator.
Yeah.
So was that at least partly what informed your decision to become a sort of artistic conscience of Nigerian society?
That definitely affected me, growing up in a household that was very political. And I remember growing up, one of his exercises for us, his kids, he would make us watch the 7 o'clock news and report it to him, sort of, you know, give him a summary.
Well,
of the
he
news.
must have been a journalist. That
know,
instinct was there.
You know, so as someone who was very creative and artistic, and then who had this deep sort of understanding of politics and exposure to politics, it was only natural that at some point my creativity would intersect with these sort of ideological beliefs that I had over time, you know, come to acquire and hold.
Well, I mean, the thing about you, I think, that strikes a lot of people, and certainly struck me when I first saw you perform, is your capacity to inspire. I mean, you're a very quietly spoken person, but when you're on that stage, your ability to inspire is quite extraordinary. What is it that inspires your poetry and works?
It's the depth. I speak from the heart. Every time I perform on stage, there's an honesty to what I'm saying. It's not contrived. I'm not really trying to gain a followership or start a movement in that sense. It comes from the heart. And there is something about honesty that disarms the listener.
Absolutely.
You know, and in Nigeria, one of the things that I have always tried to challenge is the fact that people have lost faith in words, because the speaker of these words often lacks credibility.
Absolutely.
So people listen to words and they're like, you know, they're talking again. And one of my goals, one of my objectives is to restore faith in words.
Right, to match your words with what you're actually feeling.
Exactly, to say what you believe.
A certain honesty about it. There are a lot of people, though, who think that poetry is rather feminine. I mean, some guys think it's for wimps, and that you can't be a strong boy and portray that sort of stuff that's full of emotions. I mean, but your poetry is much more than that, isn't it?
It's funny that you say that, because I got that in secondary school. You know, you had to sort of write poetry quietly. You know, but luckily I also grew up doing martial arts, so nobody could say to my face that I was in
I like that.
You know?
So that you kind of got away with that.
I got away with that.
On the other hand, of course, are there people who see your poetry as rather confrontational, as being always about political and social issues? I imagine an environment like Nigeria, which is a fairly heavily policed state, there'd be people, you know, that do that. Nevertheless, you think it's your duty as a poet to bring that sort of confrontation across.
Yes, I as a matter of my personality, I'm not a confrontational person. And one of the things I bring to the table as a poet is the ability to speak about very sensitive issues in a very delicate way. I want to be heard. I don't want to be distracted into unnecessary battles over ego or insults or abuses. So I often stay away from abusing or insulting or deliberately provoking. I simply want to bring the issue to the table in a way that you can understand me. Even if you don't agree with me, at least understand me, because I believe that that is the basis of tolerance. You cannot hate someone you understand. So I'm trying to get you to see the world through my eyes, you know. So I don't really set out to confront, but I also don't duck the difficult issues.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, but it's my job as a wordsmith to find the right words, to say it in the right way.
And I can assure you those words are very inspirational. You are, of course, not just a poet, you're also a writer. I mean, what do you write about?
I write about everything. I write heavily about politics. I write heavily about Nigerian society. One of my biggest issues is identity and the evolution of identity in Nigeria and how that is not allowed to find expression in our politics. I also write heavily about love, as should every writer.
Right, okay, so that bit does come in.
But yeah, politics is a big part of what I write about.
How would you say the general response to your performance poetry has been?
It's been
I mean,
much
did it
stronger.
astonish you,
Yes.
the way that people took to
the
you?
response to it sort of shocks me all the time, because these are things that I have been writing for a long time and sort of saying for a long time. And those who know me well would know that I'm saying words from 10 years ago. I haven't really written anything new, you know, but I'm really astonished at the response. And I just think it's a question of words whose time have come.
Yes.
And this is what people need to hear right now. This is what needs to be said.
You're hitting a nerve,
Yeah.
basically, something that's been lacking in this country. And in one interview, you describe yourself as a meritocrat.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? And does that sum up your political and philosophical ideology as far as Nigeria is concerned?
It does, fundamentally does. I'm a bit of an extremist in that regard, in that I really believe that people should be judged by the work of their hands, by how good they are, and not by where they come from, what language they speak, what gods they worship. And in a country that is as heavily where the politics of identity is so strong as Nigeria, where everything is a basis of quota systems and rotation and sharing, I sort of understand the practicality or the pragmatically some of these things have to be. But deep down within, I just feel that all human beings are the same, regardless of the color of your skin or your accents or what clothes you wear. Fundamentally, we're the same, and that we should be judged. That also should be a factor, should come to play. So I really believe in merit. And every Nigerian, no matter if you grew up in this country, you've been a victim of the non-meritocratic system. You've had to watch someone that you were better than take the job simply because they came from the right part of the country or they had the right religion. So we all bear these wounds and these scars, and I just feel it's time to give merit more room, more space to flourish in our society.
Well, we're going to take a break in a minute, but just before we do, I just wonder how much material you take from the big events and occurrences in Nigeria to inform and craft your work. For instance, as the 2019 elections approach, obviously that's going to be a big and fairly decisive factor for the next few years in this country. Have you incorporated your hopes, your aspirations, your fears for that election? And if not, are you intending to do that?
I haven't directly written about the 2019 elections specifically, but the issues that I have written about are relevant to the 2019 elections. Unfortunately, Nigeria hasn't changed much in the last 10, politically in terms of the issues on ground. So I have lots of material that are relevant to the political climate today.
Well, hopefully when we come back, we'll hear a bit of your work, your performance poetry, just a little bit of it to give people a sense of the power behind the words that you put out. You're watching Nigeria, the road to 2019. Plenty more still ahead, including more of the political poetry of Dike Chukwumerije as Nigeria stumbles towards the 2019 general elections. How much does the mainstream narrative need to change in order to secure the future of this country? Stay with us. Welcome back to Nigeria, the road to 2019. I'm Charles Onyegolu. Now, as Nigeria marches towards general elections that many hope will reset the country's economic, social and political button, we examine the path to Nigeria's salvation through the prism of political and ideological poetry. And one man who's at the forefront of advancing this form of original spoken word and performance literature to rave reviews is Dike Chukwumerije, who is with me here in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for sticking with us. Let's just start by hearing a bit of your work. Can you perform briefly one of those?
And let me do a short one. I don't
Sure.
know how much time I have. I call this "The Revolution Has No Tribe." Do you not know that poverty is not an Ijoman? He will not spare the rest of us and afflict only the Ishan. He will step across the river and come across the border. So when the drums sound, let everybody answer. Do you not know that HIV/AIDS is not Kanuri? He will not spare the rest of us and kill only the Fulani. He will set the land ablaze from the Delta to the Sahara. So when the drums sound, let everybody answer. Do you not know that corruption is not from Nekede? He will not spare the rest of us. Do you not know that corruption is not from Nekede? He will not hear that Ife has no dealings with Mother Keke. He will wake up all of our children at night with hunger. So when the drums sound, let everybody answer. Do not say, I am the Iroko when the forest is burning. Do not say, I am the Obeche when the forest is burning. Our differences will not stop us from perishing together. So when the drums sound, I beg, make una answer.
That's absolutely brilliant. And I have to say that, as you said, it's particularly relevant going into the upcoming elections. You're a keen observer of Nigerian society. How charged is the political environment in this country, and does it become more so as a major election approaches?
The political environment is always charged. And like you rightly said, it becomes more so as the election approaches. 2019 is riding on the back of 2015 and the polarization of the country virtually between the North and the East, you know. And you still have that narrative playing out. And unfortunately, the dominant issues going into the elections are around these issues of ethno-religious tensions, particularly in the Middle Belt. I would say that in the last 10, 15 years, we haven't seen such an inflammation of tensions in that region between Christian and Muslim, Northern Muslim and sort of Southern Christian farmer, herdsman, farmer crisis. And it's really worrying. It's very worrying because we're talking about the foundation of a nation here. It doesn't matter if you have sort of roads and bridges and water and light. If people fundamentally feel that they cannot live together, all those things become irrelevant.
And yet you've talked about, I've heard you talk about publicly, about the growing similarities between Nigerians. Nevertheless, Nigerian politics remains very divisive. Why is that?
Like I've said in so many occasions, I feel that there are structural reasons why people act politically in a way that is not necessarily consistent with their sociocultural background. So you find people who, you know, they come from a very diverse sociocultural background. They've mixed with other Nigerians growing up. They've gone to unity schools. They've done NYSC. But when it comes to politics, you have to assume a very monolithic identity. And it's the structure, it's the system. You have states of origin. You have these forms you have to fill. You have a structure that ensures that we all become very tribalistic when it comes to politics. And I've always wondered how come we've never been able to politicize this diversity that actually exists, these relationships that actually exist socially. So two guys who can share a bottle of beer and watch the football match together, Christian and Muslim, North and South, and they're all supporters of Manchester United, would leave that club and suddenly they don't know each other. Oh, you're a Muslim, I'm a Christian, I don't know you. So how do you take what exists socially and make it count, turn it into a political asset? I think that this is the problem for today's generation of sort of political engineers.
And that's a very good point, because this turning into a political asset, does 2019, the upcoming election, offer a chance for this dream that you so eloquently articulated to begin to become real? And if so, how best can it be managed so that it helps shape the future positively?
Personally, 2019 doesn't really, the narratives leading into the elections are the ones that we're used to, sort of the traditional narratives of region, of tribe, of rotation. And sort of one of the big things going into 2019 is perhaps, whether the North should complete its 8 terms in office.
And that's always an issue.
Comes back to the South and things like that. And these things I talk about, in all honesty, are on the margins, are on the periphery of today's political culture.
Well, it should be, but it isn't.
And but what gives me hope is that at the last elections, there were over 69 million registered voters, but only about 27 million people voted, which tells you that there is a large population of Nigerians who are completely disenchanted with the political culture as it exists. And I believe that it's because there is no narrative that appeals to that sort of silent voting bloc. And what I'm trying to do is experiment with new narratives that may awaken a sleeping giant. People that ordinarily they don't, they look at the politics and they actually don't see anybody who represents them, so they don't bother going to the polls.
So it's interesting that you say that, because as Nigeria sort of stumbles on, the people that can make that change, the leadership, aren't really listening to you, are they? And are moving along the same trajectory as we head towards that decisive election in 2019. That's what you're trying to touch, those ordinary Nigerians, to awaken in them the realization that they've got the capacity to make a change. And how should that change occur? Is it through the voting? The ballot box? Should millions of them rise up in revolt against the system?
Yeah, I think the change definitely should be made through the ballot box. And people should begin to vote. I'm tired of voting for whatever options are presented to me by the system as it is. I want a revolution, an entirely new system that throws up candidates that are representative of socioeconomic interests. So for instance, if there is a soldier who's retired from the army and can't get his pensions, is able to point at a candidate and say, that candidate represents me. If there is a mother who can get affordable health care for her children, she's able to see a candidate and say, that candidate represents me. Rather than simply having these candidates that you just see represent geopolitical zones or religions that don't really
and
represent,
you can't really connect with
issues that cut across identity.
Someone said that the hidden tragedy of a nation is to forget. If this is true, then do you think that perhaps Nigerians need to go back through the mists of history to a time before colonialism and even beyond, back to Africa's traditional institutions, to look for change, to search for their original identity and perhaps remember who they are and thus redefine themselves?
There is always a place for history in terms of defining identity. But whenever I go back, I'm always also wary about it, because people find reasons in their past to differentiate themselves. Because one of the problems in our society, for instance, is that there's no scientific study of the origins of tribes. People just have myths and stories that reinforce our differences. And so the Yoruba person will tell you he's descended from Oduduwa. The Igbo person will tell you that he migrated from the lost tribe of Israel that migrated. There's no science to this thing. And I can bet my bottom naira that if there was a science to it, we might find that we're all more related than we think that we are.
And on that note, I want to say thank you very much indeed. Dike Chukwumerije, the spoken word and performance poetry artist. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's it for this edition of Nigeria, The Road to 2019. Join us again for a fresh edition tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.